Okay, thanks so much, everyone, for coming to this King Edward Bay Water System Community Information Meeting. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'd like to make introductions first. I'll start with our committee members. We'll start with the chair, Brian Thomas. Peter, can you wave or say hello?
Yes.
Thanks. And Donald Heth.
Oh, there's Vanessa.
Jonathan Burke. Still
I
waiting.
don't see Jonathan.
Bruce McTaggart.
Don't see Bruce.
Just got the community today. This is good. Mike Penny. There he is. Okay, and we've got Councillor Allison Morse, who's the council liaison on the water committees, and for our staff, we've got Patrick Graham, the Director of Engineering, and Kristen Watson, our CFO. We're going to ask that everyone stay muted, and I will probably mute you just to avoid background noise. Patrick's going to give a presentation about infrastructure. Please keep your questions to clarifying questions, but you're welcome to ask those throughout. And then at the end of the presentation, you can ask deeper, more meaningful questions if you'd like. I think that's it. Patrick, are you ready to roll?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, any questions can go in the chat or raise your hand.
Well, I
or
was
raise your
just
digital hand.
wanting to say, if people are reluctant to speak up or they think of a question they want to ask at the end, just fire it into the chat, and that way they won't forget about it and it'll be there.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, thanks, Patrick.
Hi, everybody. So this is the same presentation that we went through at the Blue Water Water System Community Meeting last week. So I won't necessarily go into as much detail with this group. So if there's something I'm going through that you would like me to explain more fully, please let me know. So this is
Patrick, just before you start, I should say that I distributed this presentation around everyone in King Edward Bay. So a number of us would have already seen it.
okay. Thanks. So looking at the most pressing needs for the Blue Water System, and we've talked about this quite a bit over the past couple of years, is the need for additional well supply, not enough to supply from the blue water wells. And we've talked about the most cost-effective approach essentially being to upgrade the Bowen Bay wells and interconnect the systems. Water main replacement, something that was, or a key point that was made by this committee when we met in July, is the risks associated with connecting to a system that's prone to leakage. So we've looked in more detail at in particular the water mains that are highest risk, and focusing on addressing those sooner than later. We have to recognize that communities' ability to pay is an important factor that we have to take into account. If we look at the supply versus demand, on the left, this is peak day supply or demand for the three systems, Blue Water being the highest with the most number of connections. And then in terms of the well supply, the amount of water available in the Blue Water wells is nearly enough. It's reliant on King Edward Bay wells currently. The biggest supply potential is in the Bowen Bay wells, and that's where we get to the preferred approach, which is to upgrade those wells, pump into the King Edward Bay reservoir, and supply all three communities from there. Just looking at the current sources of water to Blue Water, and this is just showing from last summer. Over the course of the summer, the amount that's supplied from the Bowen Bay wells declines as the demand increases, and so a larger share is required from currently just the King Edward Bay wells. And you're all aware it's the King Edward Bay Reservoir is the one that is essentially sized for fire protection. If we look at the tank level in the King Edward Bay tank, the data from last summer, it's a concern to this group, this community, as in the municipality, that we're we should be operating between 90 and 96%. Essentially, the reservoir tells the pumps it needs more water, they supply it, as opposed to the pumps operating as much as they can, tripping off at low level, and not being able to keep the reservoir full. So that's what we want to avoid next summer. The key to avoiding that is the interconnection of the Bowen Bay wells. Just looking at the King Edward Bay tank from the summer before, where we had significantly hotter weather, I just wanted to show that the low point in at the end of June here, where the tank got close to 35%. That was the point when the Arbutus Ridge well was put into operation. And over the course of the summer, it did recover back to the operating range it's supposed to be operating in. Just in general, the proposed phasing of the water system replacement and improvements, and the well upgrades, priority water main replacements, new reservoir tank, and then capital replacement for the rest of the system is being proposed in phases. Again, recognizing that community ability to pay factor. Just so everyone's clear what we're talking about here for the additional well supply. The 3 Bowen Bay wells, the proposal is to upgrade those, install a new fill line that would connect to the existing fill line at the chlorination shed, and that would enable these wells to pump a greater capacity into the King Edward Bay tank. That would essentially approximately triple the amount of water supplied to the tank, or that could be supplied to the tank, significantly reducing the strain on the King Edward Bay wells to meet everybody's demand. So the general cost estimate is approximately $600,000. We had proposed deferring. There was a recommendation from the aquifer study and then the subsequent pre-design study looking at the well upgrades to upgrade one of the Bowen Bay or Blue Water Park wells, well number 3, that has the best characteristics for an ongoing supply. Its capacity is significantly less than what you'd gain by upgrading the Bowen Bay wells. Recently, we've had issues with the failure of this well pump, and so we'll be talking with the Blue Water Group again this week about moving this into phase 1 as well. In terms of other supply options, there is the potential to develop new wells. It's a higher risk and likely higher cost option. It's possible that there would need to be new well development in the future. We're looking at a solution here for the current and near-term demand, what we can envision. Full build out of the Arbutus Ridge development is the primary growth that we're accounting for. We've also looked at a well from the Stewart property just south of Arbutus Bridge, connecting that to the King Edward Bay tank, a potential source of additional supply there. We're allowing for that future option in the agreements with the development that's ongoing at Arbutus Ridge. So having the right-of-way and fill line installed as part of the development. There's definitely some issues with surface water supply. It's not really a reliable a source that would be as reliable as the aquifer that we have. Just looking at the Blue Water Park system, the leaks that have occurred in the past, it's not that the system is leaking all the time. There was a leak in, there was a major leak in 2019 that was repaired. There was one last year. There wasn't really records of leaks prior to that. Well, back to 2014, 2015. And there was a number of service line leaks. So we had looked at the highest risk, being the section where the leak occurred this summer. We've seen that it's not properly bedded, at least at that location. And the thinner wall plastic pipe, the 2-inch pipe at the two connection points from King Edward Bay and also along Spyglass. Spyglass is also a risk of being just up from the creek, more difficult to locate leaks with listening device, and there's the added risk of water getting into the creek, chlorinated water getting into the creek. Just looking at the two leaks that we have some record of what's occurred with the consumption. In 2022, there was a leak in June that was repaired relatively quickly within a couple of days. It did have a noticeable impact. It wasn't nearly so much as the leak in 2019, which was difficult to locate. And I just wanted to point out that this is showing, the 2019 graph is showing that the early part of 2019, when there was 50% plus leakage. The last sort of data point that we have reliable information for was the September from 2018, the September prior, when leakage was more the 15 to 20% range. So at some point between September 2018 and early 2019, that leak had developed. It wasn't that it was, there's been talk that it was ongoing for 10 years. I don't know. We don't really have record to support that, but it does have a significant impact if you have a leak that you can't locate. So we just went through with them the priority water main replacement, essentially the ones with the highest risk. I won't get into all the details here, but essentially about $1 million worth of water main is what we're recommending they include in the borrowing for phase one. There would be replace the remainder of the old mains is about 1.4 million, and we need to have a plan for financing and executing that as well. And the improved fire protection is another part of these water main upgrades. They'd be replaced with larger mains that are suitable for delivering fire flows. Ultimately, a new reservoir tank at the similar location to the existing blue water tank would be of similar size to the King Edward Bay tank. There would need to be a fill line from the King Edward Bay Bowen Bay supply from the wells. So that would be a subsequent phase. It's not as critical as the mains and the supply. And then what I've put as phase 4 is the other mains, the blue mains that I'd showed on the map earlier. The ones that still have some remaining service life were replaced more recently than the oldest ones. That would be part of ongoing capital replacement. And we need an asset management plan, which we're developing to allow us to plan better for that capital replacement over time. So, I mean, overall, it's $6.5 million worth of work broken into, a number of phases, the most critical being the well supply upgrades and the priority mains. We're recommending the next steps. We're recommending that the community, the Blue Water community, borrow long-term borrowing for the phase one money required. There'll need to be a referendum or some alternative with the community. We didn't get the endorsement from the Blue Water LAC that we were seeking on last week on the 26th. We're meeting with them again on Thursday, and we expect that we'll be able to address any remaining questions and get their support at that time. So we need to, we've had some failure of the Bowen Bay well number one, or Bowen Bay well number one, which is the most productive well that we have and central to the whole optimization plan. So that really forces the issue on advancing the detailed design and implementation for the Bowen Bay wells. As I mentioned, we need a referendum or some other alternative approval process to borrow the money that's needed. Ideally, this MOU that we spent a fair bit of time on could be completed. It's not essential to moving forward with phase one. We need to develop a multi-year budget and funding strategy for the remaining improvements. Confirm water rates, which Kristen will be talking about shortly. We're not super hopeful about grant opportunities for capital replacement work. Certainly, if there are opportunities, we'll pursue them. And improving our capacity for emergency response. One of the things we'd like to do is purchase an excavator. If we'd had an excavator, we would have been able to respond to the blue water leak that occurred in June of this summer right away, as opposed to 2 days later. We were able to get that equipment and an operator. So then this is more specific to the Bowen Bay well upgrades, which we're meeting with Bowen Bay next week. I think it's next week, and we'll hopefully have the agreement from both Blue Water and Bowen Bay to advance the necessary work. So that was a fair bit of information that I went through pretty quickly. If you'd like me to go into any more detail about anything in particular, if you have any questions, we can deal with that.
Thank you, Patrick. Does anyone have a question for Patrick? There's nothing in the chat. Do you want to unshare, Patrick? Oh, hi, Donald.
Yeah,
Thank you.
hi.
Hey,
Is it okay to ask a question now?
Yes.
yes, please.
Yeah, great. Patrick, could you go back to your slide number 6, I think it was in your presentation?
6.
Okay. What struck me there was that we depend upon our tank, not just for water supply over the summer, but also for potential fire suppression.
Yes.
And I've been going through some of the material that was supplied to Tunstall Bay, where their reservoir was deemed insufficient. And I wonder if you could comment on how those levels relate to the fire underwriters' requirements.
Well, we'd like to have it at 90% in order to meet FUS requirements for fire flow. It's probably less than that. I think it's 25% of the tank capacity is the amount above FUS storage that's for.
Actually, maybe I could just ask them because I came up with a very different calculation. When when Tunstall Bay was basically faced with this issue, it looked like the fire underwriters required 439 cubic meters of storage to meet the not only the flow requirements but also the duration. And if we apply that to our tank, which is at about 591 cubic meters, it seems to me we dropped below fire underwriters' requirements when we're at 74%.
Yeah, that was what I was saying, is it's about 75% of the tank volume is related to that FUS
We meant,
storage.
okay, sorry, you meant
remaining-
dropping by 25.
And the remaining 25 is for buffer for peak days, system resiliency, and emergency capacity.
Right, okay. So 75 or 74% is our floor here. And it looks to me like we had about 4 weeks of time in which we were below FUS standards.
Yes, that's what we need to avoid.
Yeah, because the same
we-
sort of thing happened at a lesser duration last year. So we've had 2 years in a row in which we've had substandard fire suppression coming from our tank.
Yes, yeah, that's right. You would have had, keeping it above 75% is what's needed to ensure that the FUS flow can be delivered in the event of a fire.
Okay.
And so we need to bring that additional supply into this tank so that it doesn't drop below that level.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Patrick. And also, I deeply appreciate the really frank and candid presentation. Excellent. Thank you.
Patrick, can I ask? It's Rick here. In theory, if Blue Water agreed to the referendum and approved the budget for phase 1, the borrowing scheme, what is a realistic timeline to bring that connection from Bowen Bay? Like, how long would that take?
Well, we could do it before next summer. That would be the objective, and that's realistic. We may not be able to get all of the water main work done in that time frame, but that really requires getting the referendum or alternative approval process going as soon as possible. The soonest we could bring this to council and get their endorsement would probably be the end of November. And then there's likely a 2-month process for approval, something like that. And we could advance the design and related work in parallel with that. That would have to happen in order to get it done before next summer. So it's possible. It's possible, but it's optimistic. It requires a number of things to go well.
Thank you, Patrick. Ryan, do you have a question?
Thank you. I just wondered a couple of things. What happens if the referendum doesn't go as you hope it will go, and we're left with a continuing situation of our wells in King Edward Bay being at risk?
We would, in that case, we would have to take the issue to council, and we would need to impress upon them the urgency and they can, I don't know exactly how this works, but there's mechanisms. They would be able to force the issue if they had the will to do so. That's my understanding.
Kristen?
The other option, Brian, is taxation. So that's the only way to force the issue. So if council is indeed understands the urgency of the issue and how necessary the work needs to go forward, then we could come up with a plan where we could at least advance the most critical parts of the project. And Patrick, you would help to identify what those were. And we could devise a parcel tax that council could approve without getting the approval of the residents in the local service area.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. But related to that is the idea of phase one is the only part that's related to a referendum. And I guess one of the things that I know has been spoken of a lot in King Edward Bay is the fear that the lines of supply will be provided and subsequently nothing else. And so we'll still have a system which is essentially frail. And yet there'll be no incentive then in Blue Water to address the wider problems of their distribution and storage. Can you just kind of reassure us on that one?
Well, I can understand where that concern comes from. We were clear with the Blue Water community and LAC that, phase one isn't the extent of the project, and that we need to have a plan also for financing and delivering the rest of the work that's needed. And I believe they understand that this is not, a $1.5, $1.6 million project. It's the first step of a much larger project. And I understand that, this community and probably the Bowen Bay community would like to see all of the water main, all of the old water mains being replaced, immediately to address that risk. It's a risk management exercise, this whole thing. There's and one of the risks that we have to consider is if we push something that that the community is unlikely to support. If we put forward a $5 million borrowing referendum, and we end up not getting support and not being advanced what really needs to be advanced right away, that could exacerbate the risk to the Bowen or the current risk to the King Edward Bay wells and the aquifer. So I understand it's a compromise. It's that we're proposing doing part of the work as phase one. We're developing an asset management plan, and the asset management plan for the Blue Water water system in particular is it's one of the highest priorities within that. And we'll keep working with the community as we implement phase one, with hopefully the support of the community to identify how and when we implement the borrowing for the remaining phases, or it doesn't all necessarily have to be borrowing. One of the issues we've talked about a lot with Blue Water and this group and the other LACs is the need to ramp up the contributions to reserves to be in a place where you could actually fund some needed upgrades and major capital replacement works from reserves. That's the way these systems are supposed to work. It's just the rates haven't been high enough in the past to make those contributions. So I don't know if that's reassuring for you, but that's that's essentially what we're facing. We needed to have, or we need to bring forward something that will succeed, that we believe will succeed.
I appreciate how challenging this is going to be for you guys, and thanks for your explanation. It's a little reassuring, because I know on my mind is to make this whole thing work and to secure all the assets. The practicalities of it seem to me not very reassuring, though, and I think we're all anxious about that.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any other community members who have questions for Patrick regarding infrastructure? Or would you like to move on to money? Kristen, do you have a presentation regarding rates? Oh, sorry, actually, Kristen. I've got
Oh, yeah, I see a question there. Allard.
Thanks, Allard.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
Thanks for the presentation, and it's interesting, and it's of course addressing and speaking to Blue Water's concerns. It does seem quite an uphill challenge, because even in phases, you're looking what I think is about $10,000 per phase per homeowner in Blue Water. And so even if council stepped in and enforced a $10,000 taxation package or parcel tax, I don't know how you do that 4 phases in a row. And so it seems like it certainly feels like this will be our reality for another year. And I'm wondering if there are steps that the municipality can take to limit further the amount of water that Blue Water residents can take from King Edward Bay system. And I just kind of want to speak specifically because putting up stage 4 restrictions doesn't necessarily mean stage 4 water consumption. And I also think that when Blue Water runs out of water, it starts to consume our water in the months of May, as early as May, but there's no stage 4 restrictions posted in May. They get posted in June or later. And already you can see the water starting to decline in our wells, right? So I'm just wondering if we forecast that we're going to be supplying water again to Blue Water, can the community step up and issue a stage 4 shortage earlier in the year? And secondly, implement some more punitive measures for those who ignore those stage 4 requirements. Thanks, and thanks for your time today.
More aggressive water restrictions, and essentially being more proactive, imposing water restrictions before we see signs of stress in the system is definitely something that we would consider, particularly if we're getting into late spring and the project to bring the Bowen Bay wells supply online is lagging. That's certainly something that we would look at.
Thank you, Patrick. Does that answer your question, Allard?
It does. I mean, I don't know if it answers the question about having a more punitive system for homeowners in Blue Water that still water their lawns, for example. But
well, I guess part of that would, imposing more aggressive demand management could look like imposing restrictions earlier, and we could look at, or we would look at the possibility of and more enforcement than has been done. What we're able to do within the resources that we have. So we need further discussions on the demand management side. So that looking at the water restrictions. That's what you've referenced. And potentially other measures looking at the restrictions on development, but that's not something we've discussed a lot. Certainly for next summer, our best bet would be more aggressive and more enforcement of restrictions earlier in the year.
Just to close, I want to thank you, because I think this is the first time that we've seen the municipality clearly spell out to Blue Water that this is a Blue Water issue and that it needs to be resolved with Blue Water, through Blue Water residents with of course, our assistance. But you're really highlighting now the urgency, and I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks, Allard and Patrick. Are there any more questions regarding infrastructure?
If I might just add to Allard's comment that there is, for those people who haven't seen the LAC minutes or agenda, there is actually a motion that we've placed on the agenda addressing just the things that Allard has been mentioning, and for the very reasons he's mentioned it. So we'll see that later.
Thanks, Brian. Donald, you have something to add?
I just had one final question that occurred to me for Patrick before we finish off his presentation. Patrick, on the Blue Water presentation, you made reference to the fact that the Arbutus well seems to be producing less than we expected. Can you give us some specifics on that?
Yes, we're looking into that. I mean, we were this summer, we were seeing the well pump the level down to the shutoff point, recharge, then kick back on, pump down again. We saw that cycle occurring more frequently than we expected, or than we'd like to see. And we did in July reduce the set point from 15 to 12 gallons per minute, which seemed to help somewhat. We've been investigating that further, and this is just recently we've discovered that the well, when it was installed, and the record drawings show a level sensor that monitors the well levels and the water levels, and also controls the well operation, doesn't appear to have been installed in a down tube that goes all the way from the top of the well to the bottom, which is what we expected and what we were supposed to have installed. It appears that there was for some reason, the contractor that constructed the well didn't do that. They have a tube down near the bottom of the well, but there was some space constraint at the top that they either didn't want to or weren't able to resolve. And so the level sensor cable is free hanging, and it may have gotten caught on something. Like, it's very tight, like way tighter than you would expect it to be. So it may be that the level sensor is not operating properly. So we're currently working with POCO, the well installer, the engineers of record, CREAS, and maybe we'll be talking to the developer about how we resolve that. Ultimately, we need to have the level sensor installed properly. We may have to get the wells pulled, get the pump pulled to get to the bottom of this. And we do have precision pumps coming out in a few weeks to pull the Bowen Bay wells. They could also do this, but we want to understand what POCO's obligation is, as the original well installer who, for whatever reason, appears not to have installed this down tube. So that's, I guess, a fairly detailed answer, but it could be that the problem, and this is actually hopeful. We're hoping that the issues that we're seeing, the well not performing as we expected it to, are relating to the instrumentation and not the well pump itself or the aquifer that it's drawing from.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Donald. I'm going to ask Kristen to present material regarding the rates. Our Chief Financial Officer.
Thanks, Steph. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I presented some material in the agenda package. I believe it was included with the community information package, but I'll just share the one screen so we can kind of talk about metered rate billing and how it would how it could realistically be expected to impact people. So it says I'm screen sharing. Are you looking at a colored page at the moment? I just want to make sure I've got the right page for you. Or
Yeah.
is it? Okay, thanks. So if any of you who were here at our last community information meeting back in July, I brought forward a proposal to bring in a new metered rate bylaw in King Edward Bay. We're doing this because council has identified the need to review and update water system rate bylaws in all of our water systems. So it's included in council's strategic plan. And this is just the same process that we're really going through in all of the water districts and looking at the rate structures. And, you know, following on the conversation that we had just a little bit earlier, looking at ways to encourage demand management in each of the water systems. So it was really good for me, I think, to bring the proposal to the community first, get some feedback on it. I think it was Jonathan Burke who said, hey, why don't you go and look at it and calculate those rates and then show people, you know, how that would impact them. So I looked at 2022 consumption, kind of broke it into quarterly consumption. We do a reading in December and we do another one very early in the spring. So I used those daily consumptions between the end of October and the one in December as a proxy for the first quarter, or for the first quarter of the year, and the reading from December to March for the January to March information. So the beginning and ending dates are a little bit skewed because of the timing that we did the meter readings, but I think overall it presents a good analysis and a realistic presentation of how implementation of a quarterly metered rate bylaw could potentially impact homeowners in the King Edward Bay district. The other thing that it showed me, I'll just kind of slide down a little bit to the second page in case your account isn't here. And if you don't know your account number, please go ahead and call us or call me or email me and I can let you know what your account number is. Your bills are coming out a little bit later this year because we still need to amend the rate bylaw for the King Edward Bay district this year. And we'll be doing that with the new council. It takes 2 meetings. So we'll be doing that in November 14th and 28th. We'll have a new rate bylaw and we'll send water bills. The water bills we're sending this year will be based on the same flat rate system that has already been in place. So we're not looking to implement a metered rate bylaw system until January 1st. So the next fiscal year. What I thought was good advice to go through this process and really look at consumption and how it would impact everybody's account was that it showed a few things. It showed that King Edward Bay, the residents in King Edward Bay tend to have a lot more seasonal residents. I think that more so than in many other water districts on Bowen, there's more seasonal residents in King Edward Bay. So the lower consumption that we tend to see in the winter is even lower in King Edward Bay. So by making the assumptions that I had initially, thinking that that winter consumption would be reduced by say 20% over the highest peak consumption in the summer, it's actually quite a bit lower in the winter. So had we gone full stop and implemented meter grade billing midway through the year, we would have ended up with a shortfall. We wouldn't have made our revenue target. So taking the time to really review and analyze what the impact would be on homeowners, I think was a really great process to go through. And it ended up giving us this really refined and accurate data analysis. So I think also giving the opportunity for the input from the community. We received some community feedback as to how this would impact residents. That letter went to council from Virginia, from Michael, from your wife. So again, council does really have the whole picture and how that could be expected to impact people. And we'll be able to talk about that at the LAC meeting. We'll be able to talk about that tonight at the community meeting. But really, it comes down to pricing to influence behavior. And following up on Allard, what you said, that's what we're also putting forth in Blue Water Park. The rates don't have to be the same. The structure doesn't have to be the same. We can have, if the shortages are more apparent in Blue Water, then we can have a metered rate billing system that is even more conservative. It even more attempts to influence behavior. So we're not implementing that bylaw until January either. We've committed to the community that we have the next couple of weeks to refine those rates, to really work on them. We have the same pattern, the same quarterly consumption data in Blue Water that we have in King Edward Bay. So we have the information that we need to do that work and come up with a rate structure that will do two things. One is to increase the revenue. We need to increase the revenue to contribute more to reserves. And we really need to do a better job of influencing behavior and encouraging demand management. So those are the things that we are doing to try to address what you just spoke of on the demand side. And yeah, I just wanted to give you an update on what we learned from the analysis that we've done, and we're here to hear what you have to say about it.
Are there any questions for Kristen? I'm not seeing any hands, nothing in the chat.
I will, I have this in the agenda package, this material. I will also ask Steph if it could be posted on the King Edward Bay webpage as well, so that people can go to our website and look it up and look at their account number.
It is there.
Thanks.
Thanks. I'll put that in the chat. Oh, Donald, thank you.
Yeah, hi, Kristen. First of all, this was really valuable. It's the first time we've seen this granularity in the statistics. So
yeah, it was neat.
It's really, really helpful. Thank you. But I just wanted to make sure I understood it perfectly then. What I saw was 3 quarters.
Correct.
Okay, but if I wanted to estimate annual consumption, what would you recommend? What I've done as a sort of a loose rule of thumb is I just doubled the second quarter, thinking that would correspond more closely with the conditions of autumn. But were you saying that there was a period of time where you did measure it up to December? I just didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, I do actually have the prior year, so I could actually take that prior year consumption, use that as a proxy for Q4 that's we're in right now, and do the same thing. I could add that in.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was really helpful. It was helpful to see a comparison with Blue Water Park too, and I think this is the kind of planning that we need to understand that. And I guess I just had one other question when you talked about a differential rate to try to manage demand. Is it possible that you could have a different charge per gallon over the summer when it's more critical than over the winter when it's not?
Yep, that's absolutely another tool that we have to do some kind of like a peak period rate or something, right? In the summer when it's even more critical. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Allard, do you have a question?
Yes, just a question. I don't know if that's an easy answer, but I suspect not. But do we charge, so the water that Blue Water residents essentially buy from King Edward Bay, at what rate do they pay? Like, are they paying just the cost of generating or creating that gallon? Or do they also contribute into our, long-term
Yeah,
storage?
all of the costs are included in that annual calculation. So the contributions and any actual capital expenditures are included in the cost of production. So yes.
So they pay into our reserve.
The per cubic meter charge in the cost base for that is included. The actual capital and planned capital contributions to the reserves. I just kind of looked at it today. It's actually kind of interesting. I'll bring this one up too. So over these contributions, contributions between Blue Water Park and King Edward Bay have been going on since I think 2008, 2009, somewhere. And over the course of, that's over a decade now, the amount that's been transferred is just over 150,000. And if you're looking kind of where you're at with funds, we started the year in 2022 with about 100,000 in your reserves. So, is that number that we've used over the years? Because it changes every year. We use actual costs. We don't use budget data, but we use actual costs because in one year, if your costs were higher for something, we want to make sure that we capture those actual costs from year to year. So, over the year, of course, King Edward Bay has experienced marginal costs to supply those added cubic meters of water to Blue Water Park. But with that $150,000 contribution, without that money, you wouldn't have that 100,000 in your reserve. So it has been a bit of a symbiotic relationship, because especially in the early days, when there was 9 homes there, the cost of that water system would have been very, very cost prohibitive, and water would have been very, very expensive if it was only supported by those properties in King Edward Bay. So, it has been, there has been some benefit to King Edward Bay over the years. So I did want to just take time, because I don't know if everybody, I'm sure some people are new and they don't remember what it was like in King Edward Bay when there were very, very few homes there.
It was really nice.
A bit lonely, I wonder, though.
Lonely, yeah. Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. Brian, do you have a question?
Yeah, a couple of things related to that. First of all, it is, to echo Dawn's comments, it is fantastic to have this granularity. I'm really appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to make a couple of points that actually it was, Kristen, 2015 that we first agreed about getting regular payments for the water that was going to Blue Water, but we couldn't at that point measure it. So I'd be very interested to see where you get it before that. Before then, there was no sense, and there was quite an issue that we were trying to resolve as a result of that. And the payments were always just for the marginal cost of the water that was being transferred. And then there was a subsequent calculation for the capital. Now, how we got to where you are now, despite us asking about this, you've obviously worked it out now. It's amazing to me, because we wanted to know what the algorithm is, how it's actually done, and we've not ever really been able to find out. So thanks again for pursuing that, but the detail of it, I'm sure we're going to have to look. But I think there's another issue about the cost that you're talking about, the rates, which this is connected to an issue which is unfortunately been omitted off our agenda item for the LAC, and that is a matter that I've raised several times about having a standing item about cost savings and cost saving initiatives in order to address the issue of our increasing prices of water. Now, over the last 3 or 4 years, we can see really substantial changes. Now we're thinking of changing the system so that people who are here full time are going to be paying even more. So, the calculation is I haven't done the calculation, but it would be, by reasonable standards, exorbitant. We're paying a great deal more for water year on year, and we're thinking about adding it. And it's partly because we're not participant in setting the revenue budget. You talk of the revenue budget that we have had no say in. Actually, there should be some pushback on this. What we should be saying is, how much can this community afford? And please, would you stick within that, please? Would you stay within it? I mean, it doesn't work the other way around. If it did in an unbridled way, simply look at all your costs, tally them all up, and then distribute those costs around the community who would have to put their hands in their pocket. That is really a very unhealthy way to look at that. We have to have some restraint. And the only restraint that I can think of is to have it on the agenda every time and invite you to say and convince the authority or inform us at least of how we are trying to save money in the community, how we're trying to reduce costs where we can reduce costs. It's a big ask. I know that. I've been in the public sector for 3.5 decades. I understand how hard that is, but I think we really deserve to have some kind of commentary at a regular basis about how we're keeping the costs down. So that's an important issue that I just wanted to throw out there in this discussion about money.
I mean, there are so many of the costs that are fixed costs. And the biggest one, of course, is staffing. And those costs are, we've got a full, there's 6 people that work on the water crew, and that is distributed among all of the water systems. So with like any water system, staffing is always going to be the biggest challenge. And there's just not a lot of cost reduction or savings that you can find with staffing costs. We do what we can to make sure that we have benefit programs that are cost effective and cost savings. But, we are very much faced, like every other public sector at the moment and every other private business, we are looking at having to meet the very high cost of salaries and looking at the cost pressures that other organizations are facing with their union contracts that we're settling. So we have to pay our people fairly. We have to pay them and we have to keep them. They're all well trained, and that is often our biggest cost factor. The other one, which we did talk about at our budget, which is very much front and center, is the rising cost of insurance that we are facing with all of the natural disasters that are happening. The cost increases and the pressures on our insurance premiums across the board are just, and these are things that are unavoidable costs. So there are very few areas that we can find savings in. We have to treat the water, we have to pump the water, we have to test the water. It's just, they're must-dos, and there's just not a lot of fat in there that I think that we are really able to look at cost savings. And we do have this conversation, Brian. So
if I could.
Well, thank you very much for just making some of those pressures clear to us. I didn't say it was going to be easy, and it's also easy for me to say because I'm not having to do it. But I do appreciate the commentary about it, which I think should be a regular item on our agenda.
The one other piece that I just wanted to finish with was anything that's unspent at the end of the year does not go back to the municipality. It doesn't go anywhere else. It goes right into the King Edward Bay Reserve. So it is a way to look at savings, forced savings to put into your system for savings to undertake capital maintenance in the future. So, all of those retained savings are retained within the King Edward Bay system. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Thanks very much.
Patrick, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add to that. So it's, we are always looking for ways to do things more efficiently. And recently we've been talking more about, and I guess this isn't cost savings in terms of, you're not reducing the number of staff and reducing the actual cost, but it is apparent that they do spend more time dealing with providing service connections and meters to residents who either need to replace or add to the system that aren't being fully recovered. And so we're looking at making sure that doesn't continue. That, if they spend, well, for one thing, putting more on the homeowners to hire the professional services that they need to get this work done. Our staff doesn't really have the time to be doing as much as they're doing on that front. And in situations where they have to, making sure that it's properly reimbursed for the materials they have to buy and their time. And it's especially the time that hasn't been, accounted for as well as it should be. So, that's sort of something concrete that would ultimately reduce the costs to all of the water systems that we're moving forward with.
That's just the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, and it'd be very interesting to see a cost benefit estimate and what the goal would be in cost recovery in that, and how that was going to impact our water rates. But I much appreciate your attending to this matter, and I'm going to keep raising it because I'm a bit like that. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any more questions about we've done metered rate impact analysis? Is there anything else you want to share, Kristen?
No.
Any more questions?
No,
from the
just
people
to
about
just to make it clear that and make sure that everybody did catch that we're sticking with the flat rate system for this year. We do have to amend it in order to reach that budget target, and we'll talk about that more in the LAC part of the meeting. But yeah, this isn't something that you're going to get a bill for starting tomorrow. We're going to do a lot more communication still with the members of the community.
Thank you, Kristen, our Chief Financial Officer. I think that's at the end then for our community information meeting. Thank you very much to everyone for coming and listening in and being part of the democratic process. LAC meeting members, I'll just close this meeting down. If you can stick around, we'll start the LAC meeting. Maybe take a moment to get a glass of water or whatever you need to do. The rest you can stay if you'd like, or go watch on YouTube. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.